Thanks. I just want to preface what I'm going to say by saying two things. First, there are women in this room right now who could be up here speaking, and they could probably do a better job than me. I could name some, but I won't. I know them personally. So if you're interested in hearing more stories, just look around and find out who some of the veterans are in here, and you can get a lot more information. The second point is that any one of the panels that we've had over this entire weekend could deal with this issue, because if you want to talk about rules of engagement, you could talk about the engagement of Iraqi civilian women. If you want to talk about corporate pillaging and military contractors, you could talk about contracted sexual labor. So we don't have to think that the gender and sexuality panel has to be the panel where you talk about these issues, because they transcend into the core of the war itself, and I think that that's the point of the title of the panel. In any case, that said, let's go back to the issues. In particular, you know, I was at a club last year, probably shouldn't have been, but I was at a club last year in Virginia, and I shouldn't have really been, because it was like an 18 and older club, so that meant the girls were like 18, right, and the guys were like 30. And so I see this guy, and I mean, he's attractive enough to me, and you know, big, strong and everything, my type. And but then he has on the military shirt, right? So he's a recruiter in this club full of like these 18-year-old girls, and I'm like, man, and of course you put two and two together, it's so sick, because you got these big, strong guys in this club trying to recruit these young 18-year-old girls into the military. And it's very clear, though it wasn't my experience, that the process of sexual trauma begins at the point of recruitment, not at the point of basic training. Because for many of these young women, you know, their first sexual experience with a man, not sex, but sexual encounter with a man, for many is the recruiter, you know, the first strong man you meet, if you don't have a father figure, if you don't have brothers in your life. And that wasn't my experience. I joined with a good friend of mine, and it wasn't like that for us. We didn't join sort of in that sort of desperate state, but that is a reality, and I want you to keep that in your mind. In basic training, I did see there was a woman, a young recruit, who was engaging in sexual, whatever the word is, with one of the drill sergeants. And when we found that out, it was disgusting, and it was very demoralizing, because it's like, man, we liked that drill sergeant. He was cool. Why did he have to do that? And so it got exposed, and he never sort of tried to approach me or some of the other women and hit on us, but the dynamics were there from the very beginning, depending on who you were and what your experiences were. But with men, by the time you were 18, you could be very gullible from the very beginning to having sexual intercourse with your higher-ups, and it does start there. In any case, it was a pretty smooth ride, and I was in the military. I joined in '97, and so I was in the New Jersey Army National Guard, and I was a medic, always surrounded by women, because, you know, medic. So I was always in a very woman-heavy field, and so we didn't have the same sort of experiences as women. You might be a mechanic, so you're one of like 100 men in a unit. It's a different experience. It depends on what your MOS is. And so when 9/11 happened, our unit was called up to fight, not to fight, but to do post 9/11 relief. And at that moment, I just figured my life would change, because you always knew with Persian Gulf, you knew that these guys had the Gulf War syndrome. And I said to myself, I said, I don't want to, the first thing when 9/11 happened was, we're going to war. Like, that was just common sense to me. There's no way this is going to happen, and the U.S. isn't going to go combat occupation, I'm sorry. There's going to be an occupation. So what you also know, though, is that you can get pregnant. So then I say to myself, well, what happens if I get pregnant? So then you say, well, should I get pregnant? Then maybe I don't have to go, because I'll have a baby. But we'd have to be deployed in the next 9 months for me to not have to go, because if we get deployed a year from now, I still have to go anyway. So now I have a 3-month-old baby that I can't stay with because I waited too long or I did it too quickly. This is the type of math that people had to do. And so for a lot of men, of course, you know, they're thinking, oh, you're a sellout, or you're a punk, or you joined the military, why are you going to get pregnant? You see, this is the tension that happened, and it happened from the very beginning. So I don't think it's important to go into my experience, but I just want you to know that many women did get pregnant, and many women did end up having abortions, and other women did have babies after 9/11. This started way before the occupation. You need to see how far back it goes. The entire process of war, this is what it does to people's bodies and to people's thinking. Who are these women? You know, think about the National Guard. These are people who ended up getting called out. These are mothers. These are grandmothers. So now you have guys at home saying, baby, I'll go. You stay. Let me go for you. And we know that that's not reality. That's not the way it works. When you get called up, you're the one that has to go. But in our society, there's that sort of macho, I'll protect you, baby, let me go. And that's not the reality. So now you've got these women going out there. And I can speak on behalf of many women. I can speak on behalf of a good friend of mine who was raped, and there was no evidence. So that's a huge problem, that there's no evidence. And there's no evidence because from the beginning, you're not taken seriously. So when there's no evidence, you don't qualify for benefits. And you can't claim that you have PTSD because there's no documentation of the crime. And when you try to document the crime, you're coerced or you're told that you're a sellout. And other men who might feel you and want to be on your side are also coerced and made to feel like if they speak up, then they're turning against their own. That's psychological warfare against the entire population. That's not just against the women, because these young men have to live with that too, deciding whether or not they want to be on the side of the victim or the victimizer, when in fact you guys are all in a situation where you're all being forced into an occupation that none of you are really happy about. So that's the way we need to understand this situation. That's the way we need to understand gender and sexuality. So then the question is, well, what happens if we have women in command? If we have women in command, will it solve the problem? I got it. If we have women in command, will that solve the problem? Well, I can also tell you that there are women who have had women in command, and they've been under more stress under those women in command than they have under men in command. So that doesn't necessarily solve the problem either. And just consider the fact that, you know, soon enough we might have a woman in top command. And let's think about what that's going to do for this entire situation, for this entire occupation. You know, and there are people who are lobbying to say that women should have more in the military, they should be higher up, they should have more power. Think also about whether or not that changes the nature of our situation and the occupation itself, and I'm not convinced that it does. But there are women who are trying to fight, there are women who are trying to speak out, and one very, very significant situation, of course, is Suzanne Swift, who tried to speak out and was immediately hushed. Immediately, that entire struggle was hushed, and she was just stationed over somewhere, and, you know, her lip was buttoned. So think about the fact that the military is scared out of its mind to have this panel right here. This panel is history, because now you have women in combat. You have women in combat. They're not shooting, but you have women in combat. And they're so scared that this is going to get out. So once you understand that, then the next question becomes whether or not this is always going to happen. Does every combat mean that this is what has to happen with women if women decide to be in the military? I don't think so. I think it's only in the context of these types of genocidal wars. I think it's only in the context where already the reason you're fighting is not a good reason. But if it's a good reason, I'm not convinced it's going to be this type of sexual trauma and devastation. So those are the types of things I wanted you guys to think about as you listen to these very, very important panelists. Thank you.